Chapter 19, A Matter of Faith. I have been asked many times, what more than anything else has contributed to your success? I don't have to think hard for an answer. All my life, I have been what I call an opening for contribution. By this, I mean that I have always looked for, embraced, and welcomed help and contributions from any source, including from my guardian angel. I believe that because I was an opening for contribution, people have always shown up to contribute to me. So much of what I have achieved has been due largely to the offerings I received from so many throughout my life. I don't mean to suggest that I had no part at all in my own success, because it was always my responsibility to evaluate and use or not use what was offered to me. It was always up to me to make things happen, and that's what I did. I made things happen. So I do take some credit. In the context of being an opening for contribution, I have referred again and again to my guardian angel. I believe and have faith that she will show up to direct me whenever necessary, whether I am aware that I need to be directed at that time or not. When I look back on the many times I have credited my guardian angel for directing me, I can see that it has always been marked by events and circumstances that she manipulated in my favor. She saw to it that I got out of Holland, which saved my life. She saw to it that my Uncle John came to Barbados, which redirected me from Israel to Montreal. She saw to it that I met Irving Hazenoff, who took me to the Young People's Club, where I became president, started building my self-esteem, and met Shirley, who has made the greatest contribution of all to my life. My guardian angel saw to it that I failed my auditing exam, which redirected me from accounting into a life as an entrepreneur. She saw to it that the factors pulled the plug on our credit, which set off a chain of events that gave me the opportunity to reinvent Shermax. She saw to it that Howard and Philip showed up to invent Time Eternity, which became the financial engine that helped to rebuild Shermax. She manipulated the events and circumstances that resulted in the sale of Shermax, and on and on. Although I can take credit for how I responded to and capitalized on all of these events, I cannot take credit for creating any of them. They were manipulated in my favor, I say, by my guardian angel. I have already acknowledged that having a guardian angel is my interpretation of whatever it may be that directs my life. Many may not agree with that interpretation. After all, everyone has been affected by events and circumstances that have turned out well for them, but they may be more likely to credit their own good judgment for the happy outcome than something as offbeat as a guardian angel. However, for me, I cannot honestly credit my own good judgment for all the consistently good things that have happened to me. They were more than mere coincidences. So I feel blessed in having a guiding force in my life that I choose to call my guardian angel. I have often asked myself why it is that my guardian angel seems to have been there for me at almost every turn. I always come up with the same answer. It must have something to do with believing and having faith that she is there for me and that she will always show up when I need her or when the time is right. My faith in my guardian angel creates an opening for her to exert her influence. Soul searching. Speaking of faith, I struggled with my relationship with my God for a long time. I subscribe to the widely held belief that God is the creator, and as the creator, he has created everything. I accept that good things happen and that bad things happen, and I can accept that there is sickness and death and that natural catastrophes occur. I've had no quarrel with my God with respect to any of them. I accept them all as being part of the natural order. However, for a long time, I had a quarrel with my God in connection with man's inhumanity to man. I could not accept that God, who created man, could allow man to perpetrate the atrocities that men commit. In the spring of 2004, I visited the concentration camps of Auschwitz and Birkenau in Poland. The horror of what went on there tormented me, and I was genuinely haunted by the questions: where is God? How could God allow this to happen? How could God allow all of this evil and inhumanity? I could not come to terms with a God that could endow man with such evil capabilities. Until recently, that was my relationship with my God, distrusting my faith and troubling questions with no answers. Traditionally, the Jewish holy day of Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, is celebrated by a full night and day of fasting and services in the synagogue. Yom Kippur ends with the blowing of the shofar, the ram's horn. In 2004, at the end of the services, after fasting for about 24 hours, everyone was in a rush to leave the synagogue. When the rabbi asked us to sit down, he told us the following story. A teacher asks his student, "Tell me, class, is there a God?" They reply, "Yes." "Is God the creator?" "Yes." "Does that mean that God has created everything?" "Yes." "You're sure that God has created absolutely everything?" "Yes." "Is there evil in the world?" "Yes." So if there is evil, and if God has created everything, then it follows that God has also created evil. The students pondered this for a while but could not rebut it, so the teacher felt satisfied that he had managed to prove his own personal bias, that God is the creator of evil. One of the students then stood up and asked, "Teacher, can I ask you a few questions?" And the teacher said, "Of course." "Teacher, is there cold?" "Yes." "No, teacher, there is no cold. There is just an absence of heat." And the teacher said, "I guess so. Yes, I agree." And the student continued, "Teacher, is there darkness?" "Sure." "No, teacher, there is no darkness. There's just an absence of light." "With a total absence of light, there is nothingness. So there is no darkness. There's just an absence of light." And the teacher said, "Again, I must agree." "Teacher, is there evil?" And the teacher said, "We all just agreed that there is evil." The student then said, "No, teacher, there is no evil. There is just an absence of God." That student was Albert Einstein. It took me some time to internalize that story, but the more I thought about it, the more I began to realize that the story provided me with the key to answering the questions that had been plaguing me with regard to my God. I reasoned that God had created man and gave him a special gift, the ability to think for himself and make choices. But free choice is an imperfect gift. It is like a double-edged sword. Man is free to make bad choices as well as good choices. Since God is the creator of all things, I held him responsible and accountable for all the bad choices man has made and all the evil man has perpetrated on his fellow man. Now, after internalizing the rabbi's story, my perception is that people who perpetrate evil on their fellow man make a choice, and they make that choice out of an absence of God in their lives. It is not God who is responsible for the evil and horror that man perpetrates on his fellow man. It is people who have not embraced God. It is the absence of God. Because of this interpretation, my relationship with my God has changed. I no longer hold my God responsible or accountable for all the evil men do. I am now at peace with my God. Brushes with death. At this point, allow me to relate a couple of personal experiences that put me in touch with my mortality and even closer to my God. These experiences certainly helped me get my priorities straight and have affected how I live my life. The swimming incident. Barbados has a tremendous pull on me, and I have been returning to the island regularly since I left in 1953. I love Barbados and particularly Accra Beach, where I spent much of my youth. When I'm there, I feel as if I'm 18 again. I am a strong swimmer, and when I am at my beach, I take every opportunity to swim. I've always been a high energy person, and every morning when I am there, I get up at 6 o'clock and go into the ocean for a 60-minute swim. I've been doing that for years. I start at a good pace for the first 50 minutes, and then I swim flat out for the last 10 minutes. When I'm through, I'm totally exhausted. It takes me a little while to get my wind back, then I'm fine. I find that swim exhilarating. In 1998, our entire family, children, grandchildren, everyone went to Barbados over the Christmas holidays. We stayed in an apartment right on my beach, and of course, I did my morning swim every day. The water is usually very calm there, but on the last day of our stay, it was very rough. I had some reservations as to whether I should go out into the rough waters, but I did not want to give up my last opportunity to swim before going home. So I put on my goggles and went into the water. It was a rough swim because the waves were unusually high and they were tossing me around a lot, but I persevered. As usual, I did my first 50 minutes and then I let it all out for the last 10. I gave it everything I had. Now with the rough water and all, I had drifted off my usual course, and I finished too far from shore and in an area where there is often an undertow. The waves were very high. I was exhausted and breathing heavily. In fact, I was hyperventilating, which meant that I was breathing through my mouth to get the oxygen I needed. The waves kept splashing water into my mouth, and I started to swallow water, which made me choke. To make matters worse, the tide was pulling me out to sea. I knew I was in trouble. It was about 6:45 in the morning, and there were very few people on the beach. I called for help, but I was too far out to be heard, so I started waving my hands to attract attention. However, every time I tried to wave, I couldn't hold myself up, and I went under and swallowed more water. At that point, I knew I was in serious trouble, and I saw no way out. I actually came to terms with the fact that I was going to drown. The only thing I could think of was that everybody was going to say, "Max loved the water so much. Isn't it fitting that the way he went was in the water?" That's what I was thinking when I decided to let go, to give up. However, just as I was waving my last couple of waves, my son-in-law Keith came onto the beach and he saw me. In an instant, he realized I was in trouble, and I saw him come into the water. Now, Keith is not a strong swimmer, and I knew that if he came in after me that far out, he would also get into trouble, and he would drown too. I thought to myself, this is not acceptable. It's bad enough that one of the family goes, but two of us is intolerable. At that point, I put my head down into the water, stopped breathing, and I started to propel my arms with an energy that I had no idea I had. My mind was numb. I just kept propelling my arms for what seemed like an eternity and somehow got myself out of the tide and made it to shore. In retrospect, it was a superhuman effort. I felt as if I was having an out-of-body experience. Had Keith not come into the water, I would have given up. But the prospect of both of us drowning was intolerable to me, and that saved my life. Once again, my guardian angel showed up for me that morning by sending Keith out onto that beach. Thank you, guardian angel. The heart incident. Back home in Montreal, a few days after my swimming experience, I began to have discomfort in my chest, much like indigestion. The discomfort was not severe, but it was persistent and somewhat disconcerting. After tolerating it for a couple of days, I went to the hospital and was sent immediately to have an angiogram. The cardiologist determined that although my arteries were generally clean, I had a blockage at one spot. As I understand it, what often happens is that a piece of plaque breaks off in an artery and lodges somewhere up the line and causes a blockage. I wondered if that had happened to me as a result of my superhuman effort and experience in Barbados, or was it a mere coincidence that I should have the problem 1 week later? The doctors acknowledged that it was possible, but that they had no way of knowing. Anyway, they did an angioplasty, which involves inserting a stent into the artery to open the blockage. A few days later, I felt fine and I quickly forgot about the incident. 2 years later, I began having the same feelings of indigestion in my chest, and because of my previous experience, I went to see my doctor. He told me he could find nothing wrong, but that given the symptoms and my history, he thought I should go straight to the hospital. At the hospital, they take no chances with what might be a cardiac problem, so they took me right in, put me on a monitor, and did some tests. They told me they didn't see anything wrong, but as long as I was there, they thought it was a good idea for me to stay for a few hours so they could keep me on a monitor. Shirley went out and picked up some supper, and the two of us ate in the little cubicle I had in the emergency room. Around 9:30, I told Shirley that as long as I was already there, I might as well lie down and rest, and I suggested she go home and I would call her when they released me. So she left, and I lay down very comfortably, not concerned any more, and ready to go to sleep. A little after 10, all hell broke loose in the emergency room. The loudspeaker started blaring code blue, and several people came running into my cubicle. They unhooked me in a hurry, wheeled me into a code blue room. A doctor rushed in and told me that the readings on the monitor were going wild and that I was having a massive heart attack. As soon as the alarms went off, a nurse had called Shirley and told her that I was having a heart attack and that she should come back to the hospital immediately. She told her not to drive herself but to take a taxi. She also told her to call any family members and have them come in as well. So Shirley and all my family came to the hospital. Philip, Alex and his wife Vivian, Betty and Jack, and Ellen and Peter. When I saw Shirley, I said, "Honey, we've got a problem." Meanwhile, the chief cardiologist was called at home and asked to come in. So he, the doctor in charge of the emergency room, and a few other doctors got into a huddle discussing my case. At one point, the chief cardiologist came over to me and said, "We've got a difficult decision to make. You're having a serious heart attack and we are considering two options. One is to go in and do an angioplasty and unblock the artery. However, our angiogram team has gone home and it will take us a few hours to get them together to do the procedure. By that time, most of your heart will be damaged. The other option is to give you a medication that can open up your arteries, but there's a very good chance that it will cause a stroke." In the meantime, I was not feeling much of anything except that I was numb from what was going on around me. Alex, who is my lawyer, was pacing back and forth and at one point asked, "Max, is there anything you want to tell me, want me to do or take care of?" And I said, "No, we've already done all that." Eventually, one of the doctors came in and said, "We've decided that we cannot take a chance with the medication, so we're doing our best to pull a team together as soon as possible to do an angiogram." While we were waiting, I asked for a telephone so I could call my elder daughter, Esther. I had a message for her. I told her, I don't know what's going to happen here, but I want you to know that if I do go, I have no regrets, except that I would be leaving Mummy alone. I would hate to go thinking she will be left alone, and I hope she can find someone to spend the rest of her life with. I don't want you or the others to give her a hard time. And Esther said, I got it. It took another hour or so for them to pull the team together to do the angiogram. They wheeled me out of the code blue room, along a corridor, and down to the operating room where all my family were standing outside looking very grim and somber. They don't put you to sleep when they do an angiogram. There was a monitor over my head and I could see everything that was happening. They inserted a long probe with a tiny camera on the end of it through an incision in my groin, and I watched it go up through my arteries, I think right into my heart. The doctor who was performing the procedure said to me, I don't know what they're talking about. You're as clean as a baby. There's not a damn thing going on with your heart. Max, just forget that this ever happened and get on with your life, and they wheeled me out. Everyone was overwhelmed with relief. We didn't know whether to laugh or cry. I had to lie flat on my back for about 5 hours after the procedure so the incision in my groin could close up. The next morning I was back at work. Before I left the hospital, the doctor who was the attending physician in the emergency room came to see me, and she said, I cannot tell you how happy I am to see you. I was sure I was losing you last night. That was one hell of an experience for me and my family. Although this episode was more of a false alarm than a brush with death, it certainly had the same effect. It helped me get my priorities straight. As a postscript, I went to see a series of specialists to try to find out what had happened. Why was I diagnosed as having a heart attack when I wasn't? Everyone gave me the same answer. We don't know. We can only assume that it was triggered by some kind of electrical short in your heart that caused the electrocardiogram to register what looked like a massive heart attack. The hospital gave me a copy of the electrocardiogram so I could show it to the doctor if something like that ever happened again.